Hi, welcome to Inside the Bureau Pros and Cons. I'm Sam, the National Response Director for the International UFO Bureau, and I oversee our Phenomenon Response Officers, which gives us the acronym of PRO, and those are the investigators who respond when someone reports a UAP or an anomalous experience.
I'm Leeza, Director of the Bureau's Connect team. What we call CON. We work directly with experiencers, the people who've had encounters, sightings, or contact that changed their lives and left them searching for answers.
Yeah. And on this podcast, we're going to cover UAP cases, whistleblower claims, government disclosure, scientific research, stories that flood social media, and we're going to do it through both lenses at once to get the truth. So, despite our names, pros and cons, that doesn't really mean believer versus skeptic. They describe our roles, not necessarily our worldviews.
Exactly. Sam might be a pro, but she's actually sometimes the more skeptical this one in the room. I might be a con, but because I work with experiencers every day, I'm often more open to the option that something may have been a real experience. Something real is happening. I like to consider myself an open-minded skeptic.
True. And I'd like to think I'm open minded as well. I think because, I look at cases, I tend to be a little bit more data driven, but I know that I have certainly had those times where something unusual came up and I was all in. So, but because in the Bureau, the pros and cons do have different jobs, the pro team is going to be responsible for investigating cases. So we are the phenomenon response officers or the pros. And when someone reports a sighting, an encounter, maybe they have radar data, physical traces, or anything anomalous, a pro is assigned to evaluate it. They look at things like timelines, witnesses, flight paths, sensor data, photos, videos, environmental conditions, and everything that can help determine what actually happened. Their job is to question. Their job is to determine what can be verified.
Yeah, the Connect team's a little different. We don't investigate the phenomena per se. We support the person. Um, Most people who experience something unexplained, they don't know who to talk to. I mean, they're afraid they're going to be ridiculed, dismissed, even diagnosed. The Connect team is where people come when they need to be heard. The Connect team works with experiencers to help them process what they saw or lived through, connect them to resources, make sure they don't feel alone. We do things like witness support, intake, follow up, referrals. We're not here to label someone's experience. We're here to help them live with it.
Yeah, and this is where the magic happens because the pros, they deal in data, and the cons or the Connect team, they deal in experiences. And I think, where the real truth comes or, the understanding is somewhere between those 2 points.
I agree. I personally am a retired law enforcement officer, detective with almost 30 years of experience. So I believe also in data and specifics and scientific facts, of course. But inside the Bureau brings the pro and con perspective into one conversation. You might hear Sam ask, "Where's the evidence?" And you might hear me ask, "Well, how did that make the person feel?" We don't mock witnesses. We follow where the evidence and the human story actually leads.
True. And you started to tell a little bit more about yourself, Leeza. And I think your experience as a police officer, really brings credibility to you and your ability to interview witnesses. And I mean, it really makes your background very interesting. So now, how long were you in law enforcement?
27 years.
Oh, okay.
So I was a homicide detective, undercover narcotics officer. I did a number of things. I interviewed people routinely, daily. I've dealt with a lot of different people. So my experience definitely fits with the Connect team. And how about yours, Sam?
Yeah. So right now I am a marketing manager, professional type. And so I do get to do a lot of fun things in my day job. I do events and stuff like that. But I also spend a lot of time looking at spreadsheets, smart sheets, crunching the data, getting numbers and stuff together. So I think, that just really kind of helps lead into what I do here for the International UFO Bureau.
I agree.
Yeah. And so I did want to say too, to our audience that's out there is, this is our first time doing this podcast. So you may see me look over every now and then at my notes. We want to make sure that we're giving you like all the correct information because we have a lot to share with you today. And I also think, you know what? Okay, we're going to get better as we go along. So Leeza and I are just going to have fun tonight. We hope you all have a good time too. So whether you're a hardened skeptic or a lifelong experiencer or someone who just wants to have an honest conversation about what's really in our skies, welcome. This is Inside the Bureau, Pros and Cons. And we're going to start with our very first segment. And we'll be doing this segment almost every time that we meet. And this is called UAP and social media. So recently, I have to say, the internet has been on fire. And for once, it's not just blurry dots or bad CGI. We've had 3 big stories dominate the conversation this week. So I'll briefly describe them. We had Chris Bledsoe sharing an orb photo with what looks like a numeric code inside of it. The ongoing Nazca tridactyl mummy controversy and claims that the skeletons were manipulated. And then filmmaker James Fox posting about a UAP press conference in Washington, D.C. that was involving the Brazilian neurosurgeon.
Huge. Yeah.
Yes, who claims firsthand knowledge.
Yeah.
And listen to this, knowledge of recovered non-human technology. So yeah, it's been an interesting few weeks.
I'll say.
You want to kick us off with the orb?
Yeah. I'll start with the orb. Okay, let's start with the orb. Chris Bledsoe, author of the book UFO of God, is an experiencer. He describes the beginning of his experiences, the backlash, and everything that occurred in that book. But he posted an image to X. It looks like a glowing sphere, greenish in color. I think you see it on your screen there. Mm-hmm. Inside it, people think they see numbers. 0350, 0320. It's hard to say. The internet went full Da Vinci Code on this one, as you can imagine. Some people are convinced it's proof of intelligence. Others say it's pareidolia, where you think you see things. The human brain finds patterns in the noise. A third camp said it's digital artifacting or compression. Honestly, though, Sam, it could be all 3. All 3 are plausible. The important thing here is not whether the numbers are real. It's why this kind of image hits people so deeply. Orbs are one of the most reported UAP types worldwide. They show up in military encounters, civilian videos, ancient art, modern infrared footage. They're associated with everything from consciousness to propulsion systems to atmospheric plasma.
Yeah. And, I think when somebody like Chris, who has like a really big following and he's been posting, quite a bit, when he shares something like this that looks, structured inside the orb, it does trigger the question, like, is this just light or could it actually be some sort of technology that we're actually seeing here? Like, is something actively trying to communicate with us? And I think, here is where the Bureau stance matters. Like, we're not dismissing it, but we're also not going to declare it proof either, right?
Did you hear what happened recently? I think it was November or December. He took a group of people out to a swamp in Florida. I mean, complete sky view, no light pollution. And he concentrated and he's able to attract orbs. And they came in, people photographed them. It was on video. I believe it was even live streamed at one point. That was powerful. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, well, no, you're right. Because so many of us, what we've seen is, here's Chris Bledsoe, and you see a group of people around him, right? And they're filming things, and they're seeing all these strange, anomalous orbs in the sky. And I mean, it's almost like he can do it on command. And so he's seeing something. And, people have looked, is it a satellite? Is it a plane? They've been able to go to Flight Radar 24 and no, it's not a plane. So I think it's pretty amazing. At the same time, I think when you have a group of people like that and they're expecting to see something, up in the sky, maybe it is a satellite, maybe one random one is a satellite, maybe they're seeing a string of it, and now all of a sudden all of it becomes anomalous. And so I gotta say, I mean, I do like Chris. I really like to follow him. I think his stories are interesting.
Same. Yes. Powerful.
Yeah. But let's go ahead and switch over to the Nazca mummies.
Oh boy, here we go with the mummies. Sam, don't give me a hard time about the mummies.
Well, no, but this one that's getting a little messy.
I was almost there on the mummies. Okay,
I know, because I know you've been following this story for quite a while.
Yes.
And so for those who don't know the claim, there are these three-fingered mummies, or what they call tridactyls, that are out there now. And they're non-human bodies that are found in Peru. Allegedly, they're very ancient, and allegedly, they're not human. So now we come into what the backlash is. That A, they've been manipulated. B, maybe they're glued together somehow from other skeletons. Or C, they're just completely fake. They're dolls. And so what troubled me is recently, someone, involved with this has been accused of altering or assembling parts of skeletons. And I think that's a pretty serious allegation, because here's the thing. If any part of that evidence was tampered with, it doesn't just discredit one researcher. It really can poison the entire data set.
The thing is, Sam, there were at least 14 different medical professionals. Let me get this right. Radiologists, forensic experts, DNA labs. They're saying the bones show articulation, which is where the bones meet, that is extremely difficult, if near impossible, to fake in that sort of mummy. These medical professionals signed off that they viewed the CAT scan images of the mummies and declared that they appeared to be authentic. Is this just a case, though, of some talented taxidermists? Controversy spreads faster than lab results anyway. So what's the Bureau's position? We say if these specimens are real, they will survive independent, hostile peer review. If they're not, they'll fall apart under scrutiny. Then they weren't evidence at all. They were theater. And we all know ufology's had enough theater.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. So, trying to stay with the more credible cases. Yeah. So our third story is about James Fox. And, he's built a reputation for being very careful and methodical in his work. He recently held a UAP press conference in Washington, D.C., centered around testimony involving a Brazilian neurosurgeon. And the central claim that was presented was this: that recovered non-human craft exist, that one actually crashed there in Virginia, and that biological interaction with this technology has occurred. And so, like I said, this comes from James Fox, based on his documentary, Moment of Contact. And it was presented in a formal press conference setting involving medical and scientific professionals. What is so exciting about this is Leeza and I were actually there yesterday. I mean, we could barely contain ourselves. And I know I'm going to give you a minute to jump in, Leeza, but I have to say, when we first walked into the room, let me start out by saying kudos to Darcy Weir, who is one of our own
Darcy
members. He reached out to James Fox because he has a relationship with him, and they got us seats right up front. So, we were in the reserve section. We could see and hear everything just perfectly. And we had a chance to introduce ourselves to James, later on the day. So I want to say thank you, Darcy, for making that happen for us. And then, like I said, I was on my tangent. I was so excited because when we first walked in and I sat down, right next to me was Whitley Strieber, who wrote the book Communion. So I'm like, wow, look at, some of the people who are going to be here.
Amazing.
Today. Yeah.
To my left, I had a state senator from Brazil. So a powerful man flew in from Brazil with the witnesses. I think that says a lot. Being in that room It felt very intense. It was serious. It was I haven't seen that before. So
Very true. And I think, you know, what we'd really like to do is next time on our next podcast, since we were there and we got so much footage, we're really going to go in depth on our social media part and we're going to talk about this case very specifically. We have extra video that we got with one of the witnesses, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what this, about what this was about. But to kind of recap it, for our audience here, this happened in Varginha, Brazil, and there was, a craft that crashed, and there were witnesses to this, and the witness was there. One of the witnesses was, they videotaped 6 other witnesses who they couldn't bring from Brazil into DC yesterday, and they all gave their testimony. And then this being alien supposedly escaped from the craft, had like 3 little knobs on its head, kind of dark skin, red eyes. 3 girls that were the witnesses, they saw it, told their story. And then the next thing you know, it seemed like a military officer captured the being and took it to the hospital. The military officer was somehow scratched under the arm, got a really bad infection, and died. And so a lot of the scientists that were there, have been, looking at this infection that he got. Was it, caused by the alien? And then the neurosurgeon, mic drop, said he was in the room and saw a video being done of the alien. He actually interacted with the alien. So, like I said, there's so much to talk about that we don't, we can't really go into everything today. But if you are following social media, I'm sure you're going to see it posted everywhere, and we will do a deep dive in it on our next podcast. Yes. But I think also, Leeza, here's what's really cool though, right? The venue is changing, right?
Yeah. We're moving from YouTube channels to Washington, D.C. Anonymous witnesses to people willing to give their name. This man is the leading neurosurgeon at his hospital. He received backlash when he decided to come out with this story after he suffered a near fatal heart attack. The hospital suspended him. But funny thing is, he's so great, they could not function without him and had to bring him back. So he is still operating on brains in Brazil. So this man is a legitimate, very credible neurosurgeon. And his testimony, he was tearful. It was impactful. We'll cover it in depth next time, guys.
Yeah, it was very impactful. And regardless of how anyone feels about the claims themselves, I mean, the shift was unmistakable while we were there. I couldn't believe how intense some of that testimony was.
Yeah. The setting matters, the format matters, and the people willing to testify and put their name on record, that matters.
Yeah. So, okay. Enough of social media. So let's dive into something that I think that our listeners will really appreciate. This is our segment where we're going to talk about an actual International UFO Bureau case. This is one that we, recently received. We've investigated it, and we want to share our findings with you. We plan on going over a case, maybe a historical case that we have, or one that we're currently working on. So we want to talk about a triangular craft that was in Kentucky. So this came from Harlan County, Kentucky. It involved repeated sightings reported over several weeks in mid-2011. And multiple witnesses in the area described observing a triangular and 3-lighted craft. Several people were working at a nursing facility, saw this during their evening lunch break on the night shift. And, this, I was not able to verify and get an exact date and time. This happened many years ago. And when I interviewed the witness, she just couldn't remember, she couldn't, give us an exact date and time. So we had to work, with what we had. And so essentially, you've got these people working the night shift in some sort of like nursing facility, and they go out at say like 8 or 9 o'clock at night, where they take their lunch break, and they're looking at the stars. It's a little picnic table outside, And so sometimes they would just, lay back on the picnic table and look up at the sky. So, several evenings during the lunch break, according to their report, they saw this object and it was silent, slow moving, and at times just appeared to hover. And I think what really makes this case notable is the duration. Witnesses stated that the phenomenon appeared intermittently for months at a time, and it was also visible from different vantage points in the sky.
Wow.
So I want to kind of dive into some of the research that we did in our findings on this case. So, as part of our normal, IUFOB investigation and review process, we look at several data sources. So, I'm just going to kind of go through here. So, a lot of times I just start to see, what other cases might be related to this that are reported in other databases. And one of them, you might be familiar with, and our audience might be familiar with, is NUFORC, the National UFO Reporting Center. Sometimes I just like to go through there and look at their cases and see if they had anything around, the same time. So did that, checked a couple of other databases, and they did have some triangular craft reports during this time, especially coming up in June and July of 2011. But unfortunately, I can't tie any of those specifically to this case, but I think it's notable that this was happening in the sky up above Kentucky, according to other sources. So other reporting sources. So then I did a quick media review. And this included searches of the Lexington Herald Leader that's there in Kentucky, the Mount Sterling Advocate, and a few other regional archives. And I didn't find any contemporary news coverage or any corroborating articles, to back the story up. That would have been great if we could have. Then, I checked into some air records, and open source airspace records don't show any restricted airspace or temporary flight restrictions that were in that area during the time period. And then, of course, as I always do, we want to look around for any kind of military bases that are around. And the nearest significant installations that are there in Kentucky is the Bluegrass Army Depot that's in Richmond and Fort Campbell that's near Hopkinsville. And both of those are several hours away. And there, as far as I know, there's no known military or commercial test ranges for advanced craft that, or even drones back then, if there were any, that are near that Harlan County area of Kentucky in 2011. So I didn't find anything in the search there to corroborate it. But do you want to talk about the local airports?
Yeah, I think the closest general aviation airports include Wise, Virginia, Greenville, Tennessee, and London Corbin, Kentucky, each more than 50 miles away. The nearest commercial airport, Tri-City Regional, McGee-Tyson, and Bluegrass Airport, they range from 90 to 168 miles away. So there's no routine low altitude commercial air traffic that runs through there. So there's no direct explanation there. So it remains an interesting one, though unconfirmed, I think.
True. So it looks like right now there's no verified, physical evidence. There are no photographs that we have. There's no radar that we have, or no sensor evidence that's out there for us to look at. I do think it's interesting with multiple witnesses. That always lends a little more credibility to a case when you have several people who have seen it.
Oh, yeah.
So, unfortunately, I wasn't able to even go to any of those other witnesses because she doesn't remember, their names or have contact with it. So, we are, going on what she told us from the preliminary interview. So, I would say maybe some possible, though unconfirmed explanations could include, something in the atmosphere or astronomical misidentification. It could have been some very distant aircraft, even though you were telling us about the airport. It could have been something that maybe was off in the distance still, if you're talking about 100.
We always have to keep that in mind. Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it could have been
It's worth noting.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm excited to tell you about the meteor shower. There was a meteor shower.
Well, that's what I was going to say. And so, if you wouldn't mind, because I also know that it could have been military activity too that just wasn't
Yeah.
reported, or that we don't have access to seeing. But yeah, go on and talk about the astronomical part.
Well, it is worth noting that July 2011 coincided with two active meteor showers. They were visible from southeastern Kentucky. The southern Delta Aquarids and the Alpha Capricornids both are known for producing bright, slow-moving meteors that can appear to drift, flare, or momentarily hover before fading, sometimes leaving lingering light trails. The timing of these showers overlaps with the reported observation window, might account for some of the recurring light phenomena described by the witnesses, but this does not rule out other possibilities. Natural meteor activity remains a plausible contributing factor.
All right. So let's talk about how we close this case out. So I have closed this out as a CCR3, which is unverifiable and incomplete due to the fact that we don't have a date. We couldn't talk to any of the witnesses. We don't know the time. And so what's a CCR3? Well, we do have our very own case ranking system. It's called the Case Credibility Rating Scale, so CCR. And so we base that on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is the least credible, 10 being the most credible. And if I was going to give you an example of what I think like a very credible case would be, probably the Phoenix Lights, multiple witnesses, probably some radar data that's on it, just such a great case. So, and a 1 would be a hoax. So we are saying that this is a level 3 case. And like I said, it's mostly because it's unverifiable and also incomplete with the data that we have. The case is closed right now. And I would say, we probably wouldn't reopen this again unless, somebody came forward and they did have more data and they had the exact date and time. That's the great thing. We can always go back into a case when we get more information, and then we can reevaluate at that point in time. So I have to ask you though, because, this is about triangular shaped craft. And I do believe that even 2 of the last whistleblowers brought this up. They were talking about in front of Congress when they were talking about triangular shaped craft. So, a lot of people have heard them, seen them, but specifically you, because you deal with the Connect group and the Experiencer group. Have you had any kind of interaction, or do you have thoughts around these triangular crafts from your point of view?
Well, I think they're one of the most widely reported types of craft. We mentioned orbs, also widely reported, and then your classic saucer. But I recently handled a case where a gentleman was, and I'm going to tell you this, and this is a common theme that we're seeing in experiencer cases. Not everyone, but it just pops up kind of frequently. A person will be in their house. They may have no interest in this topic at all. In their house, sitting, all of a sudden, they have this strange urge to go outside and look at the sky. So they do so invariably, and they will see something in the sky that appears to be waiting for them. In this particular case, this gentleman was in bed, sound asleep. He woke up and felt the need to go outside. As he did so, he went out and saw a huge triangular craft with a light on each corner, 3 lights, and then also a light in the center. The issue with this is it included missing time. Missing time, for those that don't know, is just what it says. So next thing he knows, he saw the craft in the sky. He wakes up and he's in bed back again on top of the covers this time, still dressed. So no explanation. He doesn't recall coming back in the house, doesn't recall getting in bed, has no idea why he'd place himself on top of the covers. So at least an hour later, he wondered what had happened during that time. So we work with experiencers, and there are options, and there are different methods we can recommend to him if he's interested to get to potentially the truth. But anyway, cases like this do remind us that not every report ends with answers. Sometimes there isn't an answer. Each one adds to the larger picture of how people experience unexplained phenomena. Speaking of how stories reach the public, Sam,
I know you think I'm getting ready to go into our next segment where we're going to be talking about
That was my
UAP
segue. That's my
personalities. It
segue.
was your segue, but I want to talk about triangular craft just a little bit longer, if you don't mind.
Okay, sure.
So, I guess I was thinking you mentioned, that there are normally like three lights in the corner, or that your experiencer saw the three lights in the corner and the one in the center. And I have certainly heard about that a lot. But I think I've also heard a lot of other reports where they just talk about the three lights in the corner, and maybe there
Yes.
isn't one in the
In the
center,
middle, correct. We see
right?
both. Yep.
And then I also, we were talking, I do believe it was one of the whistleblowers that mentioned this when they were looking at this very large triangular craft that they saw. They said like the skin of it, like the top of it, looked like it was glowing a little bit. And I think, I've heard about this, and I saw you nod your head. Have you heard about like the skin of the craft or anything glowing like
Hmm.
that before with
I've
this?
heard several stories now starting to come out about people that have advised that they have seen what appears to be a shimmering coating or covering over top of a potential spacecraft. Yes.
True. And I've also heard, some people who talk about the skin of a craft almost being lifelike, right? Like they
Yeah.
went up and they were able to touch it and it seemed to
Moving.
ripple. Yes, exactly. You know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Oh, and the last thing I want to mention about triangular craft too, because I think this is a cool tie-in, is the Hesdelin lights that are up in like Norway, Denmark, that area. I think there's like a really good
Hmm.
picture and that shows like a triangular craft with the lights. And I do believe it has the light in each corner and like a red light in the middle from
I have
those.
not seen that one. I've not seen.
So I think, there's quite a bit out there that observers have seen with these triangular craft.
Yes.
And I know that, oh, go ahead. No.
Oh no, I'm just agreeing with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you and I have talked about this too, just a little bit, is the thing that's tricky, I believe, about the triangular craft as well, is are they government? Because,
Hmm.
we've heard about the TR-3B. I think like maybe even like the B-29 is kind of, a little triangular shape. And so
Hmm.
if you're seeing something in the sky that you are not familiar with, and it's military craft that maybe you don't see all the time anyway.
Yeah.
And, everybody's been talking about triangular craft, and you look up in the sky and you see something that's black and it's big and it's triangular-ish shaped. Is that, maybe some of the source of misidentification
I
for
think that happens a lot, Sam. I think there probably have been many cases, even before the TR-3B was introduced or known about. Let's say, I believe a lot of people were probably seeing classified military aircraft on test missions or what have you. We don't know what the military really has, so
That's true. And,
yeah,
for all the conversations they have about national security, we probably should not
yeah,
know everything that they have. So,
this is
yeah,
true. Yes.
this is true. All right. So, yes, now as you so gracefully keyed me before, let's dive into our next segment,
All
which
right.
is UAP personalities. So, today we're going to talk about someone who's probably one of the most influential figures in the modern disclosure movement, and that is Luis Elizondo, or Lou Elizondo. And most people in the UAP space know him as the former head of the ATIP program, and that was the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And he was one of the first to publicly confirm that the Department of Defense was seriously studying UAP, and he was one of the first whistleblowers.
Yes, Lou Elizondo, he's a VIP. Okay, let's face it. He's a household name. Credible voices like Christopher Mellon and others have spoken very highly of him. Yet there's always been this tension behind the scenes. Some folks really trust Lou and see him as a genuine whistleblower. Others wonder whether he's pushing a narrative that serves the government or even selling his own book. Let's unpack it.
Yeah. All right. So let's start with why Lewis or Lou became such a central figure, right, to this
Okay.
conversation. So first
Oh,
of
yeah.
all, he was in intelligence for years and he worked with special operations. He had security clearances. And then when that New York Times article came out in 2017, you know, that really just blew the lid right off the top of this. And his name definitely became tied to UAP in a way that nobody else has, especially when it comes to like the modern disclosure topic.
Oh,
I,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it gave his voice like real weight.
Yeah. When someone with that kind of background comes out and says, yeah, that's real. I saw data I couldn't explain. We may not be alone. People pay attention, especially after decades where the public narrative was silence or ridicule.
Right. From an investigation standpoint, that's huge. I mean, it opened the door for pilots, for military personnel and government officials so they could actually speak freely, or maybe not freely, but they could start to speak up about this, right? And they could speak on record. And it helped legitimize the entire conversation. But here's where some folks, and maybe even on our own team, definitely out there, in the media or the broader community, where they push back just a little bit. And they want to know, is his narrative truly strategic disclosure or is it a little bit of something else? So what do you think?
Well, it seems a bit like strategic disclosure, but isn't that what we're asking for? We're asking for disclosure. So perhaps this is the way it's being done. To be clear, I think this part of the conversation is healthy. Someone being popular doesn't make them untrustworthy. I see his work with experiencers and public conversations is very valuable. But the question isn't personality, though. It's whether his statements are consistent with the established evidence.
Yeah. Let's talk about some specifics with Lou. So he's claimed that the UAP issue is real, that it is global, and that it does involve physical objects that display advanced technology, right?
Yeah.
He's talked about like the 5 observables,
Yeah.
with UAP craft. And, he also said that, the government is really taking this seriously. However, he has not said they're extraterrestrial, right? And, he's usually pretty careful not to cross that line about what he's saying, or at least not publicly.
He is very careful. When Lou first started doing interviews, he said that we may not be alone. And then, if you guys noticed, I guess a couple of years later, he was saying we're not alone. And now we're moving into other areas. So it does kind of seem like he's slowly kind of giving the public the truth. And I think that's important. A lot of people want him to go to the classified areas. They want him to talk. They want him to give definitive answers. But he sticks to what claims he can support: official interest, credible witnesses, and unexplained phenomena seen by trained observers, like fighter pilots.
Yeah. So when you look at his public statements, I do think that that's very true. His framing's very restrained. And I think overall, though, the implication is strong, right? Something is really going on in the skies that the government can't explain. And when you start talking about that, it has ripple effects.
I think Lou is a game changer in this field. Okay, that's why I say he's a VIP. People can say what they want, but he is bringing disclosure. A little too slow for our tastes, but he's still bringing it. The 2017 article that you mentioned by Leslie Kane, who we saw yesterday at the event, by the way, and Ralph Blumenthal, blew the lid off the government's actual investigations of UFOs, which they had claimed they had not been doing. So that led credibility overnight to this topic. Overnight. Suddenly, everybody was interested again.
Right.
That's huge. That's huge for trust.
Absolutely.
Lou
And I
brought
think
that. He brought that.
he did, and the credibility, right? And I think, for me as an investigator, that's very important,
Yeah.
but I think when you look at him, you're talking about, consistency. I like the consistency, the verifiability that is out there with him and his alignments with the facts. And I think Lou stayed mostly within that realm, right? He hasn't made a lot of claims that have been easily disproven. And I don't think he's made like any fantastical claims. Like I said, we already said he won't even say that he believes it's extraterrestrial. However, on occasion, I think we know that he has, made a few little mistakes here and there. Like, on social media, he definitely posted some photographs or some videos that had not been verified. And they kind of came back, there's a little bit of backlash over that. And I'd also say the other thing about him is, he wrote a great book. And, but I was expecting more. I feel like a lot of it is what he's already said, and I was like hoping he would go into some answers or some more about what it is, and I didn't get that. So, what do you think?
Yes, I mean, I'm a fan. I of course bought his book immediately. I had it on pre-order. Was expecting huge bombshells. There were some bombshells, a few in there, but again, that stuff's classified, and he's not going to go there. He's not allowed to. He has NDAs. I mean, he's got the government telling him he cannot. So here's how I see it, though. Every public figure, almost every public figure, seems to have motive or incentive. Journalists, scientists, politicians, they all have books, careers, platforms. Not everybody, but most. He does have a book, but that's not the question. Does his book distort the truth? His book, Imminent, does not. It's grounded in testimony, policy discussion, institutional access, and not wild speculation.
That's true. So, where does that leave us, right? With Lou Elizondo. For me, like you, I think that Lou is a very credible participant in this story. And, like any human being in a complex information environment, his motivations could be multi layered. He's great with advocacy, truth seeking, professional advancement, and storytelling all at once, really. So that doesn't make him a disinformation agent. It makes him a complex actor in a very complex moment in UAP history, in the UAP conversation. So I'm
I
glad.
agree.
Yeah. And, it's good to talk about both sides of that, right?
Yeah. I mean, Lou is a counterintelligence guy, counterintel. He makes that very clear. I'm not sure if he was thrust into this role as the original UAP spokesperson or not, but he's handling it well, and I'm sure it's not easy. So I think our listeners should always hear both sides. You don't have to dismiss somebody because they have a book or notoriety, and you don't have to believe them because they have a book or notoriety. You do need to ask, is what they're saying consistent with the broader evidence? In Lou Elizondo's case, I think it is.
Yeah, agreed. And, he was the first one who sat in front of Congress,
Yep.
like I said, our very first whistleblower. I can't imagine, how intense that must have been for him. And, he really put this on the map again. And,
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
want to, yeah, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but I think he is really, I, I feel like the UAP topic, we've had certain people in the community that really are great at bringing it forward. And I think for a while, the conversation had gotten a little quiet. And so once he came out, after 2017, I think that really lit up the conversation again. And, I think within the UFO community, we have just been on point, about this topic ever
Yeah.
since. And yeah. So,
That's a fact. Yes.
right. And so, for the record, though, I do want to disclose, when it comes to the Bureau point, we're not endorsing every word that Lou has ever said. And we're not trying to sell his book on the show or anything like that. But we are definitely recognizing that he played a pivotal role in this UAP conversation and bringing it into the mainstream. And I think that matters. I think that matters
Yeah,
an
it
awful
does.
lot.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly the kind of question inside the Bureau exists to explore. We're not going to defend anyone or attack anyone, but just understand the person and the evidence. I
Yeah.
also want to take a moment and mention that we lost a very great person this past week. Eric von Daniken was the author of a 1968 book called Chariots of the Gods. That introduced the ancient astronaut theory.
Yeah.
Giorgio Tsoukalos, who hosts that show, based the entire show off of Eric von Daniken's research and took off from there. So you can see what a pivotal role that played in the conversation. We will miss you, Eric von Daniken. Rest in peace. You are OG, an original gangster in this field. God bless you.
Boy, that's for sure. So well said, Leeza. My gosh. I mean, I'm just thinking, Eric in his book, he did a lot of research into historical documents and into the
Oh, yeah.
Bible. I mean, he was really into, those unusual stories that are in the
All the
Bible.
ancient texts, yes.
Yeah, that he just thought didn't make sense, or he was like, wow, could this have been, a UAP? And who is it? There's another author now, Diana, it's not Tsoukalos, Pasula, Diana Pasula. She,
Yes.
is writing about similar things. So you're right.
Exploring the religious aspect around UAP, yes. Yeah.
He was the OG for people like her,
He was.
bringing this into the forefront again with more books and stuff. So yes, he is truly going to be missed in this.
He will be missed, yes.
Yeah. So well said. All right. Well, I guess that brings us to the end of our podcast, and we want to talk a little bit about what's going on next week. So next week on the Bureau, we're going to kick off a two-part exploration into why so many GATE, which is the gifted and talented education students, later find themselves drawn into ufology, high strangeness, and intelligence-adjacent research. In part one, they'll dive straight into the most commonly shared memories former GATE students recall. Things like sensory tests, symbol guessing, guided meditation, strange classroom activities, and the uncanny feeling of being studied. Mindy and Melissa share their own recollections and examine why these memories appear across the country with surprising uniformity. And along the way, they'll connect the dots between the Cold War era intelligence priorities, gifted child identification, and the intuitive pattern-driven minds that naturally gravitate towards UFO research. So this has been Inside the Bureau, Pros and Cons. It's a place for thoughtful investigation and conversations. Thank you all for being here tonight. And until the next time, we'll leave the lights on for you.